Welcome to the Contented Couples channel. I'm Annie Power, a counsellor in London, UK. And on this channel, I'm talking to different colleagues about how partners find each other and what makes a relationship work in the long run. And today I'm talking to Reuters journalist Emma Thomasson.
Hi, Anne.
Any questions that you'd like to ask me, Emma, about what makes a couple contented and what I discovered in the research?
What I'd really like to ask you is it true that opposites attract, and is that what you've found in your research? The reason I've been thinking about this, I mean, obviously, contented couples, you wonder whether it's about opposites attracting. But in my personal case, I recently sort of found out about the 5 big personality types, and was watching a program about it, and I kind of jotted them down and was looking at where I fit on the scale. And then I was thinking, so where does my partner fit on the scale? And pretty much for every single one of the personality categories, so extroversion and neuroticism and openness and so on, we're pretty much opposite to each other. But one thing that has occurred to me is that over the years, we've probably moved closer to each other in our oppositeness. And yeah, so that was something that I was wondering if that's a trend that you've seen, how people change each other in their
How do people change each other? You've actually gone to the heart of what does make a contented couple, which is, and this comes from a writer called Gottman, who's very good on couple relationships, that a really significant thing in a happy couple is that they allow each other to influence them. And when you said you and your partner are very opposite on many categories, but you've got closer together, that says everything, because very often opposites do attract. And I do look at this quite a bit in the book. I talk about it, I call it the fascinating and the familiar. We tend to be drawn to someone who is very different, but the familiar bit is we often go for some characteristic that was there in our early family. So that's why people say, oh, he's married his mother or she's married her father. Or obviously just the same in same-sex couples. He's married his father or she's married her mother would apply, or sister or brother it can be. So we very often are drawn, we're fascinated by the undeveloped part of ourselves. So if I'm quite shy and retiring, I very likely will fall in love with someone who's quite out there and maybe quite full of themselves. If we, and in the jargon, we say the fit of those two people can be either defensive or developmental. If it's defensive, they polarize, it gets worse. The one who is a bit full of themselves becomes thoroughly arrogant and domineering, and the one who is shy and retiring becomes completely submissive and loses themselves. And that's a very unhappy. The couple, they may stay together, they may well stay together, but they'll probably be pretty unhappy, and anyone around them will sense it's not a good feeling. But if they, having started there, they then have a developmental fit, which means they learn to develop the underdeveloped part of the self. So they sort of take back what had been projected into the partner. And the one who was a bit full of themselves gets more in touch with their vulnerability. And the one who was a bit shy and retiring finds more assertiveness and belief in themselves. Then something very positive happens. The relationship is satisfying, and the two people have a deeper, fuller sense of the self. And that's a relationship really working as a repair mechanism.
That's very interesting. I just relate that back to our meeting today, which is, I would say that in the past, I was very high on the conscientiousness scale, a very sort of organized planning, forward planning. And my partner is quite chaotic, to be a bit blunt, and very low on the conscientiousness side. But I felt, coming to talk to you today, that I had not prepared myself and that I kind of left everything until the last minute, which would normally not be how I would act. But I think over the years, I have become more like my partner. Whether he's become more conscientious, that's another question. But yeah, that's good to hear, that moving together on those scales. I also actually think that in COVID, you know, being locked up with somebody for such a long period of time, that maybe that's been exacerbated in this period, you know, because just spending so much more time together that I suppose you just have to adapt in that sense. Otherwise you're going to be rubbing against each other in a bad way. I
think that's interesting, where sometimes, so you attribute it to maybe it just had to happen. Maybe it was COVID. You're not taking the credit, which is, I think when people come to study what happened to couples during COVID, I think what it is, the way you just said, for some of them, being locked up was just awful. It became more polarized and utterly miserable. But for some, it was a very developmental thing. And there was a real growth in the sense of how much I value this person and how much I can grow in this relationship. So that's a nice positive place to end. And thank you very much, Emma, for speaking to me. And if you'd like to watch more videos, please subscribe on the blue button, because I'll be talking to many colleagues in the future. Goodbye.
Bye.